So, hello everyone, how are you feeling? Great, I cannot hear you. We're talking about migration. Woo! We have to do that to talk about migration because it's the only way we get heard and maybe found. It's hard to find fundings for talking about migration. I don't know if you know, I know it. I have a foundation. We have been doing journalism and narratives on migration for the last 10 years, since the beginning of the movements in Europe. We saw so many things. And I'm glad to have we are a women panel. Yeah, also. So our colleague explained to us how difficult it is to get the audiences to connect with what we're talking about. But migration is not only about personal stories of people moving. There is something terrible that is the industry of migration control, which is a powerful industry funded by public money that goes to private hands. This is what in porCausa we do. You are all invited to visit our stand over there. So I will stop my auto promotion. And today we're going to talk about that because when you do investigative journalism, it's not easy. You don't have money, and you get a lot of pressure. We get a lot of pressure. The last report we did about the Melilla massacre, I don't know if you know, but a bunch of people died in the border with Europe and Spain. Europe and Spain, no, Africa and Spain, Europe and Africa. We have a physical border, and lots of people die there. And we were investigating that, and we had this huge amount of menace from our government. It was hard, and still we published. And at the end, we proved that there was horrible things that had happened, but nothing happened at the end. And you have this feeling of, is it worthy? Is it worthy that I'm doing that without resources? That I'm doing that under pressure, and that I don't get anything? So this is the question we are trying to answer today. Isn't it amazing? Huh? Big aplauso, venga. Yeah. Okay, here we have three women who have faced pressures. And this is my first question to them. Haïfa, first of all, tell us who you are and how you began to do migration reporting.
Hello, hi. Can you hear me well? Yes, okay.
No,
I have to cry, okay. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks, everyone. And I'm Haïfa Mzalouat. I'm a French and Tunisian journalist, and I'm working for Inkyfada, an investigative Tunisian outlet based in Tunis. Inkyfada is doing a lot of investigation, data visualization, feature stories on a lot of subjects, including migration. So yes, I worked a lot on migration in different ways. Like, I wrote a lot of testimonies, reports about what's happening in Tunisia. Like, I'm talking about migrants coming to Tunisia and Tunisian or African migrants going to Europe. But I'm also doing like investigation on migration in different topics. Like, I worked on the visa business. I worked about how Europe is externalizing its borders in Tunisia and giving a lot of money into Tunisia just to control borders. And that's it. And I started working on migration maybe 5 years ago. It's always have been important to me because my parents are Tunisian, but I grew up in France. So it was always important to talk about this topic and to talk about my father and my mother. And I did a podcast about my father during Merida's Congress.
Yes.
So yes, and I think it's very important to talk about migration. Like, it's not a surprise, but especially now, and especially in Tunisia, I'm going to give like a little bit more context after that. But the situation is really, really complicated now for migrants in Tunisia. So yes, that's why I'm talking about this subject today.
Thank you very much. Now, Eileen and then Matina.
No, you can skip me, I think, these guys.
But Matina, we know you, but why you began to do migration? Because you didn't have any other you had to do it because you were head of the European Bureau, or you were interested on migration?
I think it's a good question. I mean, in my case also, I think the original interest is family related and background related. My father's from the island of Chios, where I spent my summers, and for those of you who don't know the geography of the Eastern Aegean, it's just off the coast of Turkey, basically. My grandfather in the 60s became a sailor, got on a boat, went to Sydney, and absconded, became an illegal migrant. My grandmother and my dad's siblings later joined him, and my father stayed behind, which is a very common story for migrants, economic migrants in particular, to break up families. And I think that's really an experience that's shaped my family and myself, even though I was born and raised in Athens and no one fled. Well, I did eventually. So I think sort of, spending summers at that crossing certainly sparked an interest.
And we have our representative from America. Thank you very much for being with us, Eileen Truax. She has been my inspiration since I met her. She is one of the persons who have covered migrations for how many? Well, we cannot say, but like.
From the beginning of time, so basically.
And why, Eileen?
Hello, everyone. I'm super happy of being here. And let me tell this again, all-female panel. On migration, let me tell you, this is important. I'm Eileen Truax. I'm originally Mexican. I lived for almost 18 years in the United States. 7 of them I work as a staff reporter for La Opinión, which is the largest Spanish language newspaper in the US. Therefore, I ended up covering migration. My main beat in Mexico was politics, and because of that, it gets intertwined very much in the US, but now here in Europe, we can see that every time you have a political campaign, every time you have elections, every time you have an economic crisis, migration comes and goes, and that's the way it is. So I ended up writing about that. And I've done that all the time. I've written 3 books regarding that, going from very personal stories, like Matina was saying, family separation, etc., to the great business that represents the management of immigration detention centers in the US. And as Lula mentioned, of course, we have that here in Europe with Frontex. Currently, I'm living in Barcelona since 2 years ago. And I'm very happy to say that I see a lot of stories going on that need to be covered. So if any of you wants to join the Church of the Immigration Journalist, I'll be more than happy to preach and convince you to come to the dark side.
Thank you. Well, now we're going to tackle the thing of the being threat or being under pressure because of your work. So, and we stick with this one after the other, and we can interrupt if you need. But have you feel under pressure because of, she has the answer prepared in the phone. Okay, have you feel under pressure? How, why, especially now in Tunis, which the situation is complicated. Please, all of you, close the micro because I don't know if you hear us, but it helps.
Okay, so yes. Like this, it's okay, no? Okay, so I think I faced some pressure while working on migration, but I think the main pressure is now, because I don't know if you followed what happened in Tunisia this summer and recently, but for people who don't know, in February, the new president, Kais Saied, just gave a speech and accused black people in Tunisia, not even migrants, black people, to invade Tunisia, and that they were coming just to change the country and to destroy it. So after that, a big wave of violence happened in Tunisia, people were hiding in their house, people were assaulted, and it was kind of a nightmare because like it was just completely fascist theories coming to Tunisia and happening in this country, so it was complicated. And this summer it was like even worse because the authorities started to deport people. So they took people from Tunisian town and just let them in the desert, in the Tunisian-Libyan border and in the Tunisian-Algerian border. So people were just dying in the desert, including women, including children. And I have this feeling that it wasn't covered enough. Like, of course, at Inkyfada we talked about it, and a lot of foreigner journalists came, but we don't talk enough about all this violence and all that happened this summer, and it's still happening, and the EU is still like doing deals with Tunisia and saying that Tunisia is a safe country for migrants, where it's not. It's not at all. So we have this situation, and of course, emotionally, it's kind of complicated. I think, like, I live in Tunisia for 7 years, I think, and it was the worst, article I had to write. And like it's already a pressure, but it's getting worse because, in August, the Minister of Interior went to the Parliament and just said that all this picture, all the video, all the testimonies about people dumped in the desert were fake news, and that they were targeting and surveilling the people who were sharing this. So it's like a direct threat to journalists and to citizens who are talking about this subject. And it's really bad because people are getting afraid to talk about migration, and we especially need to talk about this now.
People or journalists, or both?
Both, because it's not only about migration. It's like all of that is happening in Tunisia. Like if the Minister of Interior is saying that people talking about migration are spreading fake news, these people could go to prison, could go to jail, because a recent decree is condemning everyone spreading fake news.
Do you have already journalists on jail?
Yes.
For covering?
Yes.
Migration, not migration.
Not migration.
Other subjects.
But for example, a journalist was condemned to 5 years, sentenced to 5 years, because he didn't want to tell who his sources was. So it's kind of bad, and I think it's getting worse. And I think migration is going to be a big topic under surveillance, and that journalists are getting more and more afraid, but we really need to talk about this, so yes.
Okay. Your turn.
Are we talking about threats or pressures or both?
Both.
Okay.
I think it is. Because
Sure.
it's amazing, no? Migration, and then you get threats and pressures.
Yeah, sure. I mean, threats, I suppose some threats. I think, for example, my father is being targeted with what's known as slaps. And I often think that may be to put pressure on me.
Yeah, Matina, but give us context, because I know who is your father, but maybe not everybody knows.
Well, he's a colleague.
He's also a journalist.
He's also a journalist.
That is important.
Yeah. But sure. And I think threats, obviously social media, misogyny, the whole gamut, this is all pretty common. I'm very fortunate, again, very privileged to work for an organization that provides legal support, emotional support, and just the backing of reporters. So I think I don't want to complain about that.
But for example, you were covering at the beginning, it was more report about people moving, then you began to have more investigative journalism. Mm-hmm. Did you sense the difference? Passing from telling stories to investigate things, and it's at European level? No.
You mean, again, pressures or threats? The pressure rises the more ambitious the story is, right? And the first point of pressure is yourself. And obviously then the environment, the authorities, other reporters, sources, and certainly managing the emotional toll of doing this work is difficult. I just try to remind myself that the people I'm writing about have it so much worse than me that I should just shut up and get on with it. Doesn't always work because however much context might matter in managing our emotions and our situations, you know, our known universe is, you know, is who we are. And so, yeah, I think it is quite evident that there is a large-scale organized assault on reporters who write about migration on social media by government agencies and officials, and in some countries like Tunisia, it's a lot worse, and in other places, it's much better, but we shouldn't take that for granted, as we don't take anything else for granted. It is clear that the direction of travel is deterioration of the environment for those of us who work on this topic.
Thank you, so interesting. And then you have the whole vision, because you've been working all around the globe, so please.
Yes,
and the evolution too.
Yes. In the beginning of times, when I started covering migration, we didn't have social media. Believe it or not, kids, we didn't have social media, and we used to use the phone, which was to make phone calls, actually. So in my newsroom, it was pretty common to get voicemails. You get voicemails. Whenever you arrived in the office to check your voicemails, you could have insults, threats, anything, because, and I'm going to make a parenthesis here, the anti-immigrant environment in the US did not start with Donald Trump. It's been there for more than 30 years. 30 years ago was the last immigration regularization in the US, and we have had that for a very long time. And you get used to the insults, you get used to whatever thing they say. Of course, if you are covering, especially in the US-Mexico border, the situation might be different. And at this point, I would like to address this. When you are talking about pressure or threats because you're covering migration, the problem is that you are not only covering migration. I'm going to talk about the case of the Mexico-US border, but this can apply to any other border in more or less. When you're talking about migration, you're talking about illegal migration too, with illegal migration paths. And in the case of Mexico and US, those paths very often are controlled by drug dealers or cartels. When the US decided to reinforce security and not allow people to cross the border in a regular way, what they did is to push the flows to different points of the border that were already being used by cartels and by drug dealers. So migration did not become dangerous just because of the trip per se, but because you were using paths that are used for crime. So what happens when a journalist in the Mexican side or the US side, but of course it's more dangerous in the Mexican side, starts covering migration, that you are covering the path, the business around, the threats, everything related to other crimes. And what I would like to address here is that whenever I speak about this, everybody thinks, oh yes, Mexico and the cartels and El Chapo. No, this is happening everywhere. We have Frontex here in Europe, and there's a huge business in detention centers and controlling the borders, but also the business that operates illegal migration and the illegal transportation of a lot of things, from arms to drugs. And everything, it's very intertwined. And if you're covering one of the subjects, you are very likely intruding into the other areas. What Martina was saying about being somehow privileged because you are part of an organization that has legal advice and more protection, and you don't mess with a journalist from the New York Times because it will be a scandal, but you mess with all of the others. To me, in this panel, we should have some of all of the others talking about threats when you do not have this huge organization. And if anyone of you is coming from a huge organization, please be aware that you have that privilege in your hands and you can use it. Because sometimes local reporters are risking their lives without that support just to cover this kind of stories. And large organizations are sending a person for 1 week to that point just to tell the story and win an award. And I want to close by saying this. When you see a Netflix series talking about narcos, talking about El Chapo and cartels, oh, that's terrible, poor Mexico. They are crossing there, and we know the names of the cartels, and we know that, but all of those drugs and narcotics are going to the US. They are being consumed in the US. I would really love to see one of these huge organizations investigating what happens after those drugs cross the border. Because from the border to a party in New York City, in Manhattan, something has to happen. Some authorities have to be involved. A lot of money is moving around. You have cartels, maybe the name is a different one, I'm sure, operating in that territory. And that cannot be reported by a local journalist. That has to be reported by huge organizations that have the resources and the security for that. The question is if they want to.
Wow. Thank you, Eileen. Something that Eileen said, and it's very important, I want to highlight, is that being on reporting migrations for the last 10 years, mainly all the people we are related with are freelancers. There's no money, and it's hard. Now we are beginning to see big organizations that are trying to report on migration, but we have been so many freelance together, helping each other, so this is the point. And that makes us less strong, as you were saying. And now is the big question. And don't tell me, yes, it is worthy, because this is not the point. So please, let's develop, because the first time I asked Eileen, but it is worthy? Of course it is worthy. We're journalists. And no. Really, I need, because at the end, everything is so hard. So hard. You're exhausted. You're mentally exhausted because the things you're covering are hard. You're mentally exhausted because you're under pressure somehow or under threat. And what do you want to get? Are you getting what you want? And I don't want to sing it, but I was almost. Yes, so, and I will begin by Eileen, and we do it the other way around. Because you have been reporter for almost 30 years. You began when you were 3. 30 years reporting. Did you get what you wanted?
It's totally worth it, of course, because I'm a journalist, but also
Please, your micro, Eileen. I'm gonna make it.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me? I'm gonna sing something for you. No, of course it's worth it, because if you are a journalist, the main reason to work in this kind of bit is a personal reason, is that you want to understand. I'm pretty sure that that's the reason why all of us became journalists. We want to understand, why are these things happening? This idea that journalists will save the world and change the, I don't think so. I just think that if we understand and we are able to explain to the rest of the people what's happening and why things are happening, that's our purpose. And if we accomplish that, we have to be very happy of doing that. We are here, only women, talking about migration and journalism. 10 years ago, this panel would have been impossible. Migration was not a bit. You could go into a newsroom and ask who covers migration. Why? What happened? Is there a raid happening, or what's happening? I mean, we have made huge advances here because we have put migration in the middle, in the center of so many other topics, because that's the way it is. It has to be with, of course, economy, with jobs. The pandemic was the perfect moment to realize that we depend on migration. Those people working in the fields, so you can still have food in your table during the pandemic. Those people bringing food to your house via Uber Eats or whatever the company is. Those people cleaning the hospitals. Those people cleaning the funeraries where the dead people went. Many, many of them were immigrants, and it doesn't matter what country you are talking about. This is what is happening. So, in my opinion, the fact that we are talking about migration, not only when an accident happens, or not only during the election time, but permanently, has made people aware that, yes, this is something that is permanently here, that is with us, and that migrants are not only in transit coming to the place where I live, that migrants are here. I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of migrants sitting here right now as journalists. And that makes it worth it, I'm pretty sure. What we have to think is that what is not worth is that in countries like mine, like Mexico, there are journalists losing their lives for covering, and that, of course, is not worthy. So it's worth when you do it in the right way. And to me, the right way to do it is if you are going, if you are following something that is huge, that involves crime, that involves the government, you have to get your back with a huge company or with a collective. That story of the lone wolf reporter getting an exclusive, that cannot be done that way. You have to work in collectives, you have to work project by project, you have to take care of your mental health, but again, you also need the resources of large media companies in order to be protected. And if large media companies don't want journalists to do real journalism, well, we are going to have a problem. Make it worth it.
No, but I mean, it is happening. It is happening. I mean, it's happening that nobody wants to do good journalism. No, sorry. Oops. that is hard to find places to do good journalism and to get support. And it's, Matina was saying it, by the way. You were saying that it is becoming more difficult to do good reporting and to follow the stories the way it has to be reported. And I think it's happening. So,
well, the problem is they ask you to do it as a freelancer. So you take the risks, you do the job, and you go and you deliver your piece, and then they publish. But, I mean, we should work in a different way. We should create collectives. We have to find funding. We have to find legal advice. If big companies are not doing that, let's do it ourselves. We have organization. We have CPJ. We have the know-how, and we know what we need.
That's a good point, and we're going to go back very little before it ends. I want Matina and Haïfa also express if they think it's worthy. In a complex way, please.
Sure, I'll try and be brief. I kind of feel like I'm, big tobacco on this panel, and it's very...
it's okay. It's brilliant. Diversity is always good.
Yeah, right. Sure. Well, just to stick up for the big bad guys, our industry is in deep financial decline. And there are very few outlets in the world that are profitable. I happen to work for one of them. 10 years ago, we were bailed out by a Mexican billionaire. So let's enjoy it while it lasts. It's hard not to feel like you got on Noah's Ark, right? And so while some people may want to see sort of shady motives behind the lack of ample funding, it also may be because our business organizations are not doing well, and very few places have worked out how to make them sustainable. It is quite clear that the ecosystem around migration reporting is growing. We have seen the growth of collectives. Stories are getting placed. I completely, and it's not, the New York Times is under a tremendous amount of scrutiny for how it treats freelancers, for example. And so it's definitely an evolving, dynamic industry and business, and as the representative of the big shop, I felt I had to say that just in response to some comments earlier. Is it worth it? I would disagree with you that we all do this work for the same reason. I think people do this work because they want to change the outcomes, and they do it for reasons that are more akin to activism. Other people do it because there's glory in it, right? So a lot of people did it in 2015 because the awards were there and they're not around anymore. There's very few of us around who were around in 2015, who stuck with it. And some of them are here. And so there's a lot of different reasons to be doing this work. And some people really believe that there's a humanitarian need for this work and draw worth from it. And all of these reasons are good and bad depending on how they come to bear in your work. I do it, and I think it's worth it, because I consider the increasingly illegal, state-sponsored criminal behavior toward people on the move a matter of the rule of law, not just a humanitarian issue. And I believe that the steady radicalization and erosion of the legal framework around which states and their actors operate against the literal weakest people on the planet is a matter of time until it spreads to the rest of us. And that's why I do it. I do it, as I said earlier, I try to limit my ambition to just getting the truth out there, illuminating what people know, and just being able to sleep at night saying I did my piece so people can't say they didn't know this was happening. So that sort of helps me answer your question to myself and my family and everyone else who suffers because of my choices to continue covering migration.
Thank you so much. It was enlightening and nice. Thank you.
New York Times.
Okay, I
not
like
so bad.
that. Now, Haïfa, is it worthy
Yes.
where you're living?
No, yes, of course, sometimes you are like...
Seeing your friends in jail also?
It's not directly my friend, but yeah, colleague. No, but yes, of course, sometimes you can be desperate when you are working on migration. As it's interesting what you said about like people coming because like for the glory, because you are seeing that in Tunisia a lot. Like recently, a lot of journalists came, and of course, they are doing their job, and they are doing often good job, but when you're there and you are seeing all the dynamics and you really know the context, and like we are really trying to you know, like to detail the narrative, and just like, for example, a lot of European journalists are always saying, okay, yes, these people are coming to Tunisia just to go to Europe and they are dying and it's sad, but there is more, and there is a lot of other stories to tell. And what I wanted to say is that, of course, when you are seeing all this violence and you are reporting and covering that, it is hard, but I think that's why investigative journalism is important too, because sometimes you are telling stories that people don't know at all, and even if it's like far from the testimonies. Like, for example, when I worked on the visa business, it was very important to tell Tunisians that the European countries were hiring private companies who are doing tax optimization in Luxembourg with the money of Tunisians who are paying for visa and who are being very humiliated by this whole procedure and this whole process. And it's part of the migration stories too. And no one ever said that. Like, no one ever told people that these kind of companies were completely abusing and using Tunisian money, like for... So even if sometimes when you're working on migration, you don't feel directly the impact, and you are sometimes a bit sad because it doesn't change anything, I think it's very important, like for, like, I don't know, as a reference. Like, if one day we are going to change the legal framework, if one day we are going to really talk about what's happening in Tunisia and in other countries, Inkyfada and other media will give like the material and say, okay, we worked on that and it's important. So even if I'm like sometimes desperate, I know it's really useful, so yes, it's worth it.
How many people in Inkyfada are working
On migration?
on migration?
I think like journalists are working on a lot of subjects, but maybe we're 2 or 3, like it depends of it. It depends.
How do you found your investigations? Where do you get the money from?
Inkyfada is like a non-profit organization, so we have donors, and we also like doing some services like trainings, and like we're trying to be like self-sufficient and independent. So yes, I'm lucky enough to have a salary, so I can work on migration like I want.
Eileen, how do you found your work on migration?
You mean the
Money. Where do you get the money to work?
Oh.
Because I know it, I know the answer, but I want everybody to know the answer.
Okay, it's not easy.
Martina, I'm going to ask you that.
It was easier when I was staff in a newsroom. When I decided to become a freelancer, I planned it very well. I created a pool of publications where I could contribute. I made a first investment in my first coverage, and since then what I've done is I never worked for free, and I devote part of my earnings to my next coverage. So basically, I try to make that a machine that is financing itself. I've written books. You don't live out of books at all. Those are like very fancy business cards. But what they do is that they raise a little bit your name in terms that you can earn more money for your reporting, and that's the way it works. And so I have the microphone, but I'm saying that. Just want to compliment when Martina was saying, I think it's important to mention this regarding motivations and why do we do, and what do we expect. And it's important to say, journalists, I believe, cannot change the world, but people can. With the right information, people can change the world. And I think it's important, especially for students, to remember that maybe you will not see the return or the result immediately, but you will see it because people well informed will make the right decisions sooner or later, or sometimes and sometimes not. We see that in governments, but that's what we are doing. We are giving people tools, and they will make this world better, and that's why it's working.
Okay, we have only 2 minutes left, and I'm going to close the panel. We're not going to get questions, but there's a reason why. We don't have time. So I'm very sorry, but this is an open conversation. We're going to be down the stage. You want to talk with us? We're going to be here. Thank you so much. Yeah, we don't have time, so it was a decision with the manager's stay. The only thing I want to say, to add to this conversation is, lots of new medias are, or new ways of doing journalism, not medias, are rising now. There's an enormous evolution of the way we are doing our job and we're doing journalism. It is what Martina said, we're in between. It's brilliant to have people like you, Martina, in the New York Times. Probably you won't stay there for the rest of your life, and you will join maybe one of
Maybe I'll be like that weird animal that actually has one job and retires from one newspaper. That'll be, yeah.
But I see faces here with new projects that are covering migration, and our lives are changing. Migration is on the top of the news. All the time, our way of covering is changing. And last words to say goodbye, girls. It has been a pleasure to be with you all. Eileen, words to close, a tweet of this conversation, what would be?
Just to tell you that it wouldn't be strange to be in a conference that talks about economic journalism, business journalism, political journalism, but we don't have migration journalism conference, but one, the one that porCausa organizes every year. We have a migration journalism congress. It's not about migration, it's about journalism, journalists who cover migration. You can go to our website. We have a booth in the back, and we have that event every year in Spain. You are all more than welcome. We need more people talking about migration all around.
Martina, your tweet?
I think you've heard enough from me. I'll yield.
Okay, Haïfa, your tweet?
No, just thank you.
Okay, 30 minutes, we go. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.